Hey Susan, how are you today, my beautiful queen? Susan rolled her eyes without looking up from the espresso machine. Come on, James, stop calling me that. I told you, I'm not your beautiful queen. You should be calling your wife that, not me. Now, do you want coffee or not, or did you just come here to annoy me again? James smirked, casually leaning over the counter like he owned the place. Oh, come on, love. You know you enjoy it when I call you my queen. In fact, you're my sweetheart now. What about that? Don't you want to be my sweet little secret? He chuckled. I bloody well do not. Susan snapped, pouring hot coffee into a takeaway cup. Now either pay for this coffee or sit over there and read the free newspaper like a normal customer. Or better yet, pull out your laptop, connect to my free Wi-Fi, and do something useful with your life. Just stop messing with me, I'm busy. Whatever, sweetheart, James said, winking as he grabbed the coffee off the counter. Then, before she could protest further, he reached into her apron pocket, pulling out her phone. Hey, what are you doing? Susan exclaimed, reaching for it, but James held it just out of reach. Relax, love. I'm just adding my number. You've been dodging me long enough. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, saving his contact info before tossing the phone back to her. You had no right to do that. Susan hissed, stuffing the phone back into her pocket. And you had no right to ignore me all these months, James countered with a grin. Now you officially can't avoid me anymore. See you tomorrow, sweetheart, James said, winking as he grabbed the coffee off the counter. Hey, you didn't even pay for coffee. Susan called out. Guess I'm a thief now too. 3 pay tomorrow. See you, sweetheart. The bell on the cafe door jingled as he strolled to his car, leaving Susan fuming and secretly intrigued. Later that evening, after closing up the cafe, Susan found herself staring at her phone. Sure enough, there it was. James, sweetheart. She groaned, tempted to delete the contact altogether. But curiosity got the better of her. Did he really think he could charm his way into her life so easily? Her thoughts were interrupted by a notification flashing on the screen. A new message from him. Can't stop thinking about our chat today, it read. You're unlike anyone I've ever met. Susan hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to delete the message, block him, move on. But instead she typed back, Careful, James. Your wife might not like hearing that. His reply came instantly. May doesn't understand me the way you do. Susan stared at the words, a mix of anger and longing swirling inside her. She knew she should end it right then. But as she set her phone down, she realized she couldn't. Not yet. Whatever this was between them, it wasn't done playing out. And so, the game continued. The next morning, Susan woke up with James's last message still lingering in her mind. May doesn't understand me the way you do. The words felt heavy, like a door creaking open just enough for her to peek inside. But she wasn't sure she wanted to see what lay beyond. She arrived at the cafe early as usual, setting up the espresso machine and arranging fresh pastries on the display counter. When James walked in precisely at 8:05 a.m., his typical time, her heart skipped a beat despite herself. He wore his signature navy suit today, tailored perfectly to his frame, but there was something softer about him this morning. His smile didn't carry its usual arrogance. Instead, it seemed almost vulnerable. Morning, love, he said, sliding onto his usual stool by the counter. Espresso shot for me, please. Susan busied herself with the machine, refusing to meet his gaze. You're lucky I haven't blocked your number yet. James chuckled, leaning forward slightly. But you didn't block me, did you? That means something. It means nothing, Susan snapped, though her voice lacked conviction. She placed his coffee in front of him, deliberately avoiding his hand when he reached for it. Here. Pay or leave. I'll pay tomorrow, he said lightly, taking a sip of the coffee. Just like yesterday. Susan crossed her arms, glaring at him. You're impossible. And you're fascinating, he replied, his tone shifting. For a moment, his eyes locked onto hers, and Susan felt her defenses waver. There was sincerity in his expression, something raw that made her stomach twist uncomfortably. Before she could respond, the bell above the door jingled, signaling another customer. Grateful for the interruption, Susan turned away, pretending to organize cups behind the counter. James lingered for a few more minutes before leaving, but not before tossing one final comment over his shoulder. "We'll talk later," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Susan exhaled sharply once he was gone, gripping the edge of the counter. What was happening to her? Why couldn't she shake him off? Over the next week, their exchanges became more frequent and more personal. During slow hours at the café, James would sit at the counter, chatting with Susan about everything from business strategies to childhood memories. He told her about growing up in a strict household where success was expected, not celebrated. About how he'd built his company from scratch, sacrificing friendships, hobbies, even sleep along the way. And about May, how their marriage had been arranged by their families, more of a business merger than a union of hearts. "You deserve better than her," Susan blurted out one afternoon, immediately regretting the words as soon as they left her mouth. James raised an eyebrow, amused. "And who deserves better than you, "This isn't a game, James," she shot back, irritation bubbling beneath her calm exterior. "You're married. You have responsibilities. Stop acting like we're some tragic love story waiting to happen." For once, James didn't laugh or deflect. He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we are. Maybe tragedy is what happens when two people find each other too late." Susan stared at him, caught off guard by the intensity in his eyes. She opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. Instead, she turned away, focusing on wiping down the already spotless counter. "Don't say things like that," she muttered finally. "You don't mean them." "Yes, I do," James said softly. "That's the problem." By the end of the week, Susan found herself looking forward to his visits. It wasn't just the flirting or the banter. It was the way he listened to her, really listened, as if her thoughts mattered more than anything else in the world. They talked about her dreams of expanding her coffee shop into a chain targeting tourists who craved authentic Kenyan experiences. James offered advice, connections, even funding ideas, surprising her with his genuine interest. One evening, after closing the café, Susan decided to take a walk along the beach to clear her head. The ocean breeze was refreshing, the sound of waves crashing against the shore soothing. Lost in thought, she didn't notice James approaching until he spoke. "Fancy meeting you here," he said, joining her on the sand. "What are you doing here?" Susan asked, startled. "I followed you," he admitted without hesitation. "I needed to see you." Susan shook her head, exasperated. "Do you ever give up?" "No," James replied, his tone serious now. "Not when it comes to you." They stood there for a moment, the silence between them thick with unspoken emotions. Finally Susan sighed. Whatever this is, it's dangerous. We're playing with fire." "I know," James said quietly. "But sometimes fire is worth getting burned for." Susan looked at him, searching his face for any sign of dishonesty. All she saw was truth and longing. Before she could stop herself, she took a step closer, her voice trembling. "Why does it feel so easy to be with you? Like we've known each other forever." "Because maybe we were meant to," James whispered, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch sent shivers down her spine. Susan closed her eyes, trying to resist, but resistance felt futile. Whatever this connection was, it was stronger than logic, stronger than fear, stronger than guilt. And in that moment, standing under the stars with the sound of the ocean surrounding them, Susan realized she was falling for him, hard. The next day at the café, Susan was unusually quiet. She avoided looking directly at James when he walked in, focusing instead on steaming milk for another customer's latte. Her heart raced every time their eyes accidentally met, but she forced herself to act normal, for both their sakes. James noticed her distance immediately. He sat at his usual spot by the counter, watching her with a mix of concern and frustration. Finally, when the café emptied out for a brief lull, he leaned forward and spoke softly. "What's wrong?" he asked. Susan hesitated, wiping down the counter unnecessarily. "Nothing." "Don't lie to me," James said, his voice firm but gentle. "You've been avoiding me all morning." She sighed, setting the cloth down and finally meeting his gaze. "I can't keep doing this, James. Every time I see you it feels like I'm betraying someone. Myself, your wife, my own principles. This isn't who I am." James reached across the counter, his hand brushing hers briefly before she pulled away. "I know it's complicated. But what we have, it's real, Susan. Don't throw that away because you're scared." "I'm not scared," she snapped, though her trembling voice betrayed her. "I'm trying to do the right thing. You're married, James. Married. Do you even realize how messed up this is?" He flinched at her words but didn't back down. "Of course I realize it. But May and we haven't been happy for years. Our marriage is a facade, a business deal wrapped in designer labels and social appearances. She doesn't care about me, not really. And I don't think I ever cared about her either." "That doesn't make it okay," Susan whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "It doesn't make us okay." James looked pained, running a hand through his hair. "Then tell me what to do, Susan. Tell me how to fix this. Because I can't imagine walking away from you now." Susan shook her head, stepping back. "There's nothing to fix. We shouldn't even be having this conversation." Before he could respond, the bell above the door jingled, signaling new customers. Susan turned away, busying herself with orders, but her mind was elsewhere. How had things gotten so out of control? When had she stopped being able to resist him? Later that evening, after closing the café, Susan sat alone in her small apartment, staring blankly at the wall. Her phone buzzed repeatedly. It was James, texting her non-stop. "We need to talk. Please don't shut me out. I meant everything I said today." Each message made her chest tighten. Part of her wanted to reply, to give in to the pull she felt toward him. But another part, the rational moral part, screamed at her to delete his number and cut ties once and for all. Instead, she did neither. She simply stared at the screen, paralyzed by indecision. 2 days passed without a word between them. James didn't show up at the cafe, and Susan told herself she was relieved. Maybe he'd finally gotten the message. Maybe he'd moved on. But deep down she knew better. On the third evening, Susan decided to take another walk along the beach. It was her way of clearing her head, of processing the whirlwind of emotions she couldn't seem to escape. As she strolled barefoot along the shoreline, she spotted a familiar figure sitting on the sand, staring out at the horizon. James. Her first instinct was to turn around and leave, but something stopped her. Maybe it was the look on his face, so lost, so broken, or maybe it was the realization that she couldn't run forever. Reluctantly, she approached him. "What are you doing here?" He glanced up, surprised but not displeased to see her. "Waiting for you." "You shouldn't be here," Susan said firmly, crossing her arms. "This isn't fair to either of us." "I know," James admitted, standing up. "But I couldn't stay away. Not after everything we've shared." Susan sighed, shaking her head. "You don't get it, do you? It's not just about feelings. It's about consequences. What happens when people find out? When your wife finds out? Have you thought about that?" "Every damn second," James replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But I can't stop thinking about you, Susan. About how alive I feel when I'm with you. About how much I want to help you chase your dreams, build your coffee empire. About how much I need you in my life." Susan swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "You don't need me, James. You just think you do because you're unhappy. But this isn't the answer." "It is the answer," he insisted, stepping closer. "Because without you, I'm just going through the motions, living half a life. Doesn't that mean anything to you? She wanted to argue to push him away again. But the truth was she felt the same way. Being near him ignited something inside her she hadn't felt in years. Hope, passion, purpose. And no matter how hard she tried to deny it, she couldn't ignore the connection they shared. "I hate you for making me feel this way," she whispered, her voice breaking. James smiled sadly. "Good. Hate me if you have to. Just don't walk away." And then, against every fiber of her better judgment, Susan leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. For the first time in days, she let herself breathe. Over the next few weeks, their relationship deepened despite Susan's internal protests. They began meeting outside the café more often. Long walks along the beach, late-night conversations under the stars, stolen moments in secluded corners of the city. Each encounter left Susan more conflicted than the last, but also more certain of one thing: she couldn't stay away from him. One evening, as they sat together on the sand, James turned to her with a determined look in his eyes. "I have an idea." Susan raised an eyebrow, wary. "An idea? That sounds dangerous." "It might be," he admitted. "But hear me out. What if you came to work for us? As our house manager?" Susan blinked, stunned. "Are you serious?" "Yes," James said earnestly. "May spends most of her time traveling anyway. She won't notice. And if she does, I'll convince her it's necessary. Someone responsible to oversee the house while she's gone. It makes perfect sense." "And what exactly would I be overseeing?" Susan asked skeptically. "Your laundry. Your dinner parties." "No," James said, his tone softening. "Our future. Yours and mine. If you're there, we can be together whenever she's away. No sneaking around, no hiding. Just us." Susan stared at him, torn between disbelief and temptation. "That's insane. What if someone finds out? What if May suspects something?" "She won't," James assured her. "Trust me, she barely notices anything outside her own world. Besides, I'll make sure you're paid well. You can focus on building your coffee shop chain during the day, and we'll have our nights together." Susan shook her head, overwhelmed. "I don't know, James. This feels reckless." "Maybe it is," he said, taking her hand. "But isn't it worth it? To live fully, freely, honestly, for once in our lives?" Susan didn't answer right away. She gazed out at the ocean, the waves crashing against the shore mirroring the storm inside her. Was she ready to take such a huge risk? To step even further into the unknown with him? Finally she looked at him, her decision clear in her eyes. "If we do this, there's no turning back." James smiled, squeezing her hand. "There never was." The plan seemed simple enough on paper. Susan would pose as the house manager, overseeing the household operations during May's frequent absences. In reality, it meant living under the same roof as James and his wife, walking a tightrope of deception every single day. The more Susan thought about it, the more uneasy she became. One evening, after agreeing to consider the idea, Susan met James at their usual spot on the beach. She paced along the shoreline, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "I can't do it," she said abruptly, stopping in front of him. "I won't." James frowned, standing up from where he'd been sitting. "What are you talking about?" "This whole house manager thing," Susan snapped, gesturing wildly. "You think I'm going to wash May's clothes? Cook her meals? Watch the two of you pretend to be some perfect couple when she's home? Well, absolutely not." "Susan, calm down," James said, trying to reach for her hand, but she pulled away. "I am nobody's maid, James," she continued, her voice rising. "Never have been, never will be. Do you even hear yourself? You're asking me to play servant in your ridiculous charade, all so we can sneak around behind her back. What happens when she figures it out? When she catches us? Have you thought that far ahead?" James sighed, running a hand through his hair. He looked genuinely conflicted, which only fueled Susan's anger further. "You don't get it, do you?" she pressed. This isn't just about sneaking moments together anymore. This is my dignity we're talking about. My self-respect. Stop, James interrupted sharply, surprising her with the intensity in his voice. You're not hearing me. That's not what I want. Not at all. Susan froze, staring at him. Then what exactly do you want? I want you to manage the house, not scrub floors or cook dinners, he explained, his tone softening. You'd oversee staff, handle finances, make decisions about maintenance and logistics. Hell, you could even run your coffee business from there during the day. You wouldn't be anyone's maid, Susan. You'd be independent, capable, brilliant. Exactly who you've always been. She hesitated, caught off guard by his words. And what about May? What happens when she's here? How am I supposed to act normal seeing the two of you together? You won't have to interact much, James assured her. May barely notices anyone outside her own world anyway. And when she does talk to you, it'll be superficial. Polite orders, nothing personal. Trust me, she won't suspect a thing. Susan shook her head, still skeptical. It sounds too risky. Too easy to slip up. It's not easy, James admitted. But it's worth it. Because without you, none of this matters to me. Not the house, not the money, not anything. His gaze was unwavering, filled with a mixture of desperation and sincerity. Susan felt her resolve wavering again. As much as she hated to admit it, part of her wanted to believe him. To believe they could find a way to make this work. To build something real amidst the chaos. Finally, she exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing slightly. If I agree to this, and I'm not saying I will, you swear I won't be treated like a maid? That I'll have control over my responsibilities? I swear, James promised, stepping closer. You'll be managing the house, not serving it. And if anything feels wrong, we'll figure it out together. Okay. Susan studied him for a long moment, searching for any sign of dishonesty. All she saw was determination and hope. Against her better judgment, she nodded. Fine, she said quietly. But one wrong move, James, and I'm gone. No arguments. He smiled faintly, relief washing over his face. Deal. A week later, Susan found herself standing nervously outside James and May's sprawling estate. Dressed in a crisp blouse and tailored trousers, she carried a small suitcase containing her belongings. Her stomach churned with a mix of excitement and dread as James opened the door, greeting her with a reassuring smile. Welcome home, he said softly, ushering her inside. Susan forced a polite smile, though her heart raced. The house was breathtaking, a blend of modern luxury and timeless elegance, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being an intruder in someone else's life. As James gave her a brief tour, explaining her duties and introducing her to the few staff members who lived on site, Susan kept reminding herself why she was here. For her dreams. For their connection. For a chance to live fully, however fleeting it might be. But later that evening, as May returned from one of her social events, Susan's confidence wavered. Clad in designer clothing and dripping with jewelry, May breezed past her without a second glance, dismissing her presence entirely. Susan clenched her fists, reminding herself of James's promise. She wasn't here to serve May. She was here for herself, for them. Still, the weight of the lie pressed heavily on her shoulders. For now, though, she had no choice but to play along, one step at a time. The first few days in James and May's home were a whirlwind of adjustments for Susan. She spent her mornings reviewing household accounts, coordinating with the cleaning staff, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. By afternoon, she retreated to a quiet corner of the house, a small office James had set up for her, to work on her coffee business plans. The evenings, however, were the hardest. When May was home, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. May floated through the house like a queen surveying her kingdom, expecting perfection from everyone around her. To Susan's relief, May barely acknowledged her presence beyond curt instructions or dismissive nods. It was as if Susan were invisible, an arrangement that suited both women just fine. James, on the other hand, struggled to maintain his composure. Every time May left the room, he'd glance at Susan with a mix of longing and guilt. They exchanged fleeting smiles or brushed hands when no one was looking, but these moments only heightened Susan's unease. The weight of their deception pressed down on her constantly, making it hard to breathe. One evening, after May retired early, Susan found herself alone in the kitchen fixing a cup of tea. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see James leaning against the doorway, watching her intently. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. Susan shrugged, stirring sugar into her tea. "I'm managing." "That's not what I asked," James said, stepping closer. "Are you okay?" She hesitated, setting the spoon down before turning to face him. "Honestly, well, this isn't easy, James. Pretending to be someone I'm not, living in someone else's house, watching you two act like nothing is wrong, it's exhausting." "I know," James admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "And I hate putting you through this. But every time I see you here I feel like maybe, just maybe, we're doing the right thing. For us." Susan sighed, crossing her arms. "It doesn't feel right though. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Before he could respond, they heard the sound of heels clicking against the marble floor. May appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Still working, Susan?" she asked coolly, glancing between her and James. "Yes, ma'am," Susan replied stiffly, forcing a polite smile. "Just finishing up some paperwork." May nodded absently, then turned to James. "Darling, don't stay up too late. You have meetings tomorrow." "Of course," James said, his tone neutral. "Good night, May." As May disappeared upstairs, Susan exhaled sharply, leaning back against the counter. "This is insane." "It'll get easier," James whispered, though even he sounded unsure. Susan shook her head. "Or it'll drive me crazy." Over the next few weeks, Susan settled into a routine, or as close to one as she could manage under the circumstances. During the day, she threw herself into her work, using the quiet hours to build her coffee shop brand online. Orders for Kenyan beans began trickling in, giving her a sense of accomplishment amidst the chaos. At night, when May was away, she and James stole precious moments together, laughing under the stars or sharing quiet dinners in hidden corners of the estate. But cracks in their carefully constructed facade began to show. One afternoon, while reviewing invoices in her makeshift office, Susan overheard raised voices coming from the living room. Curious, she stepped out cautiously, catching snippets of an argument between James and May. "You never listened to me," May snapped, pacing back and forth. "I told you months ago we needed to hire someone competent to manage this place. But did you? No. And you think hiring someone on a whim solves everything?" James retorted, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You jet off to Europe every other week without a second thought, leaving me to deal with the fallout." Susan froze, torn between guilt and fascination. She hadn't realized how strained their marriage truly was, or how much resentment simmered beneath the surface. "We wouldn't even be in this situation if you cared about appearances," May shot back, her voice dripping with disdain. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is to explain to my friends why our household is such a mess?" James clenched his fists, visibly restraining himself. "Maybe if you cared about something other than your social circle, we wouldn't be having this conversation." The tension in the room was palpable. Susan backed away silently, retreating to her office before either of them noticed her presence. Her heart raced as she processed what she'd heard. Their marriage wasn't just unhappy, it was toxic. And she was caught in the middle of it. Later that evening, when May went out for dinner with friends, Susan confronted James. "What was that about earlier?" she asked, folding her arms across her chest. James sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just another fight. Same old issues." "No, James," Susan said firmly. "This isn't same old issues. That was hatred disguised as frustration. How long has it been like this?" He hesitated, avoiding her gaze. "Years. Maybe since the beginning. Susan stared at him, realization dawning. You're trapped, aren't you? So are you, James countered softly. We're all playing parts in this ridiculous play. The difference is I chose mine. You didn't. His words struck a nerve. Susan wanted to argue, to deny it, but deep down she knew he was right. They were both prisoners of their choices, bound together by a connection neither fully understood. Despite the growing tension, life in the house continued its strange rhythm. Susan grew more adept at navigating May's moods and expectations, learning to anticipate her demands without letting them affect her self-worth. Meanwhile, her relationship with James deepened, their stolen moments becoming lifelines in an otherwise suffocating environment. One evening, after May departed for yet another trip abroad, James surprised Susan with a picnic on the beach. They drove to a secluded cove, spreading out a blanket beneath the stars. For the first time in weeks, Susan felt free, untethered from the lies and secrets that weighed so heavily on her. This is nice, she admitted, sipping wine as waves lapped gently at the shore. Almost normal. James smiled, reaching for her hand. We deserve this. Even if it's just for tonight. Susan leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. Do you ever wonder what happens next? After all this? All the time, James murmured. But I try not to think too far ahead. Right now, I just want to hold on to this moment, with you. For once, Susan didn't argue. She let herself believe, if only for a little while, that maybe happiness was possible, even within the confines of their complicated lives. But as the night wore on, a nagging thought lingered in the back of her mind. Happiness built on deception couldn't last forever. Sooner or later the truth would come out, and when it did, everything would change. Susan had always assumed May was oblivious, too consumed with her high society lifestyle to notice anything happening in her own home. But one afternoon that assumption was shattered. May had returned unexpectedly from a weekend trip, storming into the house with an air of barely contained rage. Susan was in the kitchen reviewing grocery orders when May entered, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Without a word, May tossed her designer handbag onto the counter and turned to Susan, her icy gaze piercing. Where is James? She demanded. He's in his study, I believe, Susan replied cautiously, sensing the tension radiating off May. May nodded curtly before heading toward the study. Susan watched her go, her stomach tightening with unease. Something felt off. Later that evening, after May retired to her room, James appeared in the kitchen looking visibly shaken. He poured himself a drink and sank into a chair, avoiding Susan's questioning gaze. What happened with May? Susan finally asked, unable to contain her curiosity. James hesitated, swirling the liquor in his glass. She knows. Susan froze, her heart pounding. Knows what? About us, he said quietly, his voice tinged with guilt. Well, not everything, but enough to suspect something. Susan's mind raced. What did she say? How could she possibly know? She didn't come out and accuse me, James explained, running a hand through his hair. But she dropped hints. She mentioned how odd it is that you're here, managing the house, and how convenient it is for me that you're always around when she's gone. She even joked about whether I hired you as my personal assistant, or something more. Susan felt sick. And what did you tell her? I denied it, of course, James said quickly. But she wasn't convinced. She said she'd be keeping an eye on things from now on. Susan exhaled sharply, sinking into a chair across from him. This changes everything. If she suspects us, we can't keep pretending nothing's wrong. James leaned forward, his expression desperate. We'll figure it out. We have to. But Susan wasn't so sure. For the first time, doubt crept into her mind, not just about their plan but about May herself. What if May wasn't as clueless as they'd thought? What if she had been playing them all along? Over the next few days, May's behavior shifted noticeably. She lingered in the house more often, observing Susan with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Small comments slipped into conversations, an offhand remark about how efficient Susan was, or a pointed question about her background and qualifications. Each interaction left Susan feeling increasingly uneasy. One morning, as Susan reviewed staff schedules in the living room, May joined her unexpectedly. Dressed impeccably in a silk blouse and tailored pants, she carried herself with an air of casual authority. "You've done a remarkable job here, Susan," May began, her tone deceptively light. "The house has never run smoother." "Thank you," Susan replied cautiously, unsure where this was going. May smiled faintly, though her eyes remained sharp. "I must admit I was skeptical at first. Bringing someone new into the household. Well, it's always a risk. But James insisted, and now I see why." Susan forced a polite smile, her pulse quickening. "I'm glad you're pleased." "Oh, I am," May continued, sipping her tea. "Though I do wonder, how exactly did you two meet?" Susan's breath hitched, but she kept her composure. "At my café. Your husband used to visit regularly." "Ah yes, the café," May mused, setting her cup down. "Such a quaint little place. Tell me, Susan, do you miss it? Running your own business, being your own boss." Caught off guard, Susan hesitated. "Of course. It's still my dream to expand it someday." May tilted her head, studying her intently. "Dreams are important, aren't they? But sometimes we make sacrifices for them. Wouldn't you agree?" The subtext was clear. Susan swallowed hard, nodding stiffly. "Yes, ma'am." May stood, smoothing her skirt. "Well, carry on. You've earned your position here. Just don't forget who gave it to you." As May walked away, Susan sat frozen, her mind reeling. That conversation hadn't been casual. It had been calculated. May knew something, or at least suspected, and she was testing Susan, probing for weaknesses. That night, Susan confronted James in private. They met in the garden, away from prying eyes, under the cover of darkness. "May's on to us," Susan whispered urgently. "She's been dropping hints, asking questions. She's not as blind as we thought." James frowned, clearly troubled. "I told you, she suspects something, but she doesn't know for sure." "Not yet. And what happens when she does?" Susan shot back. "Have you thought about that? 'Cause I have. This whole arrangement is built on lies, James. One crack, and the entire thing collapses." "I know," James admitted, his voice strained. "But we can't stop now. Not when we're so close." "To what?" Susan demanded. "To destroying your marriage. To ruining both our lives. Is that really worth it?" Before James could respond, they heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, they separated, pretending to admire the flowers as May appeared in the doorway. "Still working, Susan?" she called out, her tone laced with mockery. "Yes, ma'am," Susan replied, forcing a smile. "Just finishing up some last-minute tasks." May nodded absently, then turned to James. "Darling, don't stay out too late. You look tired." "Of course," James said evenly, masking his frustration. As May disappeared inside, Susan exhaled sharply, leaning against the railing. "This is getting dangerous, James. Every day we stay here, the risk gets higher." "I know," James repeated, his voice softer now. "But I can't lose you. Not now. Not ever." Susan stared at him, torn between fear and longing. She wanted to believe him, to trust that their connection was strong enough to withstand anything. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a razor-thin line, one misstep away from disaster. A few days later, Susan discovered something that changed everything. While organizing files in the study, she stumbled upon a folder labeled Personal Correspondence. Curiosity got the better of her, and she opened it, finding a series of letters addressed to May, all signed by someone named Daniel. The content of the letters made her blood run cold. Daniel wrote openly about their affair, detailing secret meetings and intimate moments. One letter stood out in particular. You deserve better than him, May. He's dull, predictable, and completely oblivious to your needs. Be with me instead. Together, we can leave this charade behind. Susan's hands trembled as she read the words over and over again. So May wasn't innocent either. She'd been having an affair all along, probably since the beginning of her marriage. Suddenly, pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. May's resentment toward James, her constant travels, her subtle digs at Susan. It all made sense now. May wasn't just suspicious of them. She was protecting herself. If James ever found out about her infidelity, she'd lose everything. The money, the lifestyle, the image she worked so hard to maintain. Susan closed the folder, her mind racing. This revelation changed everything. With this knowledge, she held power, a dangerous advantage in their already precarious situation. But what would she do with it? Susan sat alone in her small office late that night, staring at the folder she'd discovered. The weight of May's secret pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had always assumed May was the wronged party, a victim of James's betrayal, but now she realized their marriage was a tangled web of lies, resentment, and mutual dissatisfaction. What should she do with this information? Confront May. Tell James. Or use it as leverage to protect herself if things spiraled out of control. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. James poked his head in, looking concerned. Still working? He asked, stepping inside. It's late. I couldn't sleep, Susan admitted, quickly closing the folder and sliding it under some papers. Too much on my mind. James moved closer, his expression softening. You've seemed distracted lately. Is everything okay? Susan hesitated, debating whether to tell him about the letters. But something stopped her. If she revealed May's affair, it would only escalate the tension in the household, and potentially destroy any chance they had at happiness together. Instead, she forced a smile. Just thinking about the café. I miss it sometimes. James nodded, understanding. I know it's hard being here, playing this role, but you're doing incredible work, not just with the house but with your business too. We'll get through this, Susan. Together. His reassurance was comforting, but Susan couldn't shake the feeling that their fragile peace was teetering on the edge of collapse. For now, though, she decided to keep May's secret to herself. Knowledge was power, and she needed all the leverage she could get. Over the next few days, Susan found herself walking an even thinner line. May continued to watch her closely, dropping subtle comments and testing boundaries. Meanwhile, James grew increasingly paranoid, convinced May was planning something. One evening, after May left for yet another social event, James cornered Susan in the kitchen. We need to be more careful, he said urgently. May's been acting strange, like she's waiting for us to slip up. Susan nodded, pouring herself a cup of tea to steady her nerves. She knows something, or at least suspects. But she hasn't confronted us directly yet. And we can't let her, James insisted, pacing back and forth. If she finds out, I don't know what she'll do. She could ruin everything for both of us. Susan set her cup down, her voice firm. Then we stop giving her reasons to suspect anything. No more late-night meetings, no lingering glances. We act like nothing's wrong until she leaves again. James stopped pacing, looking at her with a mixture of frustration and admiration. You're stronger than I am, Susan. I don't know how you stay so calm. I'm not calm, Susan admitted quietly. I'm terrified. But panicking won't help us. We have to think clearly. If we want this to work, we have to play it smart. James nodded reluctantly, pulling her into a tight embrace. I wish we didn't have to hide like this. So do I, Susan whispered, resting her head against his chest. But for now, it's the only way. Despite their efforts to maintain appearances, cracks began to show. One afternoon, while Susan was reviewing invoices in the living room, May entered unexpectedly, her expression unreadable. I need to speak with you, May said curtly, gesturing for Susan to follow her. Susan's stomach churned as she trailed behind May into the study. Once inside, May closed the door firmly before turning to face her. "I've noticed something odd lately," May began, her tone icy. "Certain inconsistencies in the household accounts. Missing funds, unexplained expenses. Care to explain?" Susan's heart raced, but she kept her composure. "I review every transaction personally, Mrs. Carter. There must be some misunderstanding." May raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Or perhaps oversight on your part. Either way, I expect these discrepancies resolved immediately, or I may need to reconsider your position here." Susan clenched her fists to steady herself. "Understood. I'll look into it right away." As she left the study, Susan felt a surge of anger and fear. May wasn't accusing her of theft outright, but the implication was clear. This wasn't just about the accounts. It was a warning shot. May was tightening her grip, testing Susan's loyalty and patience. Later that evening, Susan confided in James. "She's trying to push me out," Susan said, her voice trembling with frustration. "Using the accounts as an excuse to undermine me." James frowned, his jaw tightening. "She's scared, Susan. Scared of losing control. Of losing me." "Well, she's not going to lose either of us without a fight," Susan snapped. "And frankly, I'm tired of tiptoeing around her. We're risking everything for this, James. What happens if it's not worth it?" James didn't answer. He simply pulled her close, holding her silently as the storm brewed around them. The tension in the household reached a breaking point over the following weeks. May became increasingly hostile, questioning Susan's every decision and scrutinizing her actions. At the same time, James grew distant, consumed by guilt and paranoia. One evening, after another heated argument with May, James sought out Susan in her office. He looked exhausted, his usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. "I can't keep doing this," he confessed, sinking into a chair. "Living this double life, it's tearing me apart." Susan studied him, her heart aching. "We knew it wouldn't be easy, James. But giving up now isn't an option." "Why not?" he asked bitterly. "For what? So we can keep hiding, lying, pretending. Is that really what you want?" "No," Susan admitted softly. "But I also don't want to lose you. Not after everything we've been through." James sighed, rubbing his temples. "Neither do I. But sooner or later, the truth will come out. And when it does..." He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. Susan knew what he meant. When the truth came out, there would be no going back for any of them. It happened one fateful evening, during one of May's rare nights at home. Susan and James had grown careless, allowing themselves a stolen moment in the laundry room. The space was cramped but private, shielded from prying eyes, or so they thought. They were laughing softly, their bodies pressed close, when the door suddenly swung open. May stood there, her expression unreadable as she took in the scene before her. For a moment no one spoke. Then May stepped inside, closing the door behind her. To Susan and James's shock, she didn't yell or scream. Instead, she calmly lit a cigarette, leaned against the washing machine, and exhaled a plume of smoke. "You two are unbelievable," May said finally, her tone eerily calm. "Did you honestly think I wouldn't find out?" Susan's heart sank, but James recovered first. "May I?" "Save it," May interrupted sharply. "I've known for weeks, maybe months. Did you really believe I was that oblivious?" Susan swallowed hard, stepping forward cautiously. "May, please. Let us explain." "There's nothing to explain," May replied coolly. "You're having an affair. My husband is sleeping with a help. It's cliché, really." "It's not like that," James protested, his voice tinged with desperation. "Susan and I. It's complicated." "Oh, spare me the romance novel nonsense," May snapped, rolling her eyes. "You think I care about your feelings? Your soul connection? Please." Susan frowned, confused. Then why aren't you angry? Why haven't you thrown me out, or worse? May smirked, taking another drag of her cigarette. Because I'm not the victim here. In fact, I've been having my own affair since practically the beginning of our marriage. The room fell silent. Susan and James exchanged stunned looks as May continued. That's right, May said smugly. Daniel. You probably remember the name. You stumbled across his letters, didn't you? Well, let me save you the suspense. I married James for his money and status, not his personality. And frankly, darling, she added, turning to James, you bore me. All you do is work. So yes, I found someone who actually satisfies me, in bed and otherwise. Susan stared at her, speechless. This was not the reaction she'd expected, not the confrontation she'd feared. So what now? James asked hoarsely. Are you going to leave me? Expose us? May laughed bitterly. And give up this lifestyle? Hardly. As long as I get what I want, I don't care what you two do behind closed doors. Just don't make it obvious. And don't embarrass me publicly. With that, she stubbed out her cigarette and walked out, leaving Susan and James reeling in stunned silence. In the weeks following May's shocking confession, life in the house grew increasingly unbearable. May continued her charade of indifference, flaunting her affair with Daniel while subtly undermining Susan at every turn. Meanwhile, James and Susan walked on eggshells, their stolen moments becoming rarer and more fraught with tension. One evening, after another exhausting day of navigating May's passive-aggressive comments, Susan retreated to her office, her mind racing. She stared at the folder containing Daniel's letters, still hidden under stacks of paperwork. For months, she'd used May's secret as leverage, but now she wondered if it was time to use it as a weapon. James found her there, sitting silently in the dim light. He closed the door behind him, his expression grim. We can't keep living like this, he said, his voice heavy with frustration. It's killing us. Susan looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. What choice do we have, James? Leave. Run away. And then what? Spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, waiting for May to expose us. I don't care about May, James snapped, pacing the room. Let her tell the world. Let her take everything, I don't care. All I care about is you. But I care. Susan shot back, standing abruptly. I won't let you throw your life away for me. Your business, your reputation, it's everything you've worked for. And me. I'm just complicating things. You're not complicating anything, James exclaimed, stepping closer. You're the only thing that makes sense anymore. Don't you see that? Everything else, the money, the status, the lies, it's all meaningless without you. Susan shook her head, trying to hold back tears. But what happens when the shine wears off, James? When reality sets in and we realize we destroyed 2 lives, including ours, to be together. What then? James hesitated, his voice softening. Then we'll face it. Together. For a long moment neither spoke. The weight of their choices pressed down on them, suffocating yet clarifying. Finally, Susan exhaled sharply, reaching for the folder beneath the papers. There's a way out, she said quietly, handing it to him. May's secret. If we expose this, if we reveal her affair publicly, it could free us both. James frowned, opening the folder and scanning its contents. His jaw tightened as he read Daniel's words. This changes everything. It gives us power, Susan admitted, her voice trembling. We can force May to leave you, or at least agree to a divorce. Then we wouldn't have to hide anymore. James closed the folder, his expression conflicted. And if we do that, we become just like her. Manipulative. Calculating. Is that who we want to be? Susan hesitated, guilt washing over her. He was right, it wasn't who they were. But desperation had driven her to consider it. No, she whispered finally. It's not. They stood in silence, the enormity of their situation sinking in. Then James reached for her hand, pulling her close. "There's only one thing I know for sure," he said softly. His voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Whatever happens, from this moment forward, I choose you. Not because of lust or rebellion or convenience, but because my soul knows yours. Because being with you feels like coming home." Tears streamed down Susan's face as she clung to him, her heart breaking and mending all at once. "And I choose you, James. No matter the cost." Months later, the fallout from their decision had reshaped their lives completely. After confronting May with evidence of her affair, James filed for divorce, a move that shocked everyone in their social circle. May fought back bitterly, threatening lawsuits and public scandals, but ultimately, she agreed to settle rather than risk exposure. Meanwhile, Susan poured her energy into expanding her coffee shop brand, using the chaos as fuel for her ambition. With James by her side, she opened her first café in Mombasa, catering to tourists eager for authentic Kenyan experiences. The venture thrived, earning praise from locals and visitors alike. Their relationship remained complicated, scrutinized by outsiders, tested by lingering guilt, but their bond only grew stronger. Late at night, as they sat together under the stars, James often reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever regret it?" Susan asked one evening, leaning against him. "Regret what?" James replied, tracing circles on her palm. "Leaving May. Losing everything. Well, because none of it mattered. Not compared to this." Susan smiled faintly, resting her head on his shoulder. "Sometimes I wonder if we were always meant to find each other. Like fate intervened." "Maybe," James murmured, kissing the top of her head. "Or maybe some connections are just too powerful to ignore." As the waves crashed against the shore and the moon cast its glow over the ocean, they knew one thing for certain. Their love wasn't perfect. It hadn't been easy. But it was real, and that made all the difference.